Christianity today has anywhere from 30 to 40,000 different sects. Some are very similar to one another, others have only the loosest connection to Orthodox Christianity. Some people are tempted to think that the early Christians really had none of these problems, that they presented a unified front up until the point of the Protestant Reformation. This, however, couldn't be further from the truth. To get an idea of how Christianity was in the first 500 years of its inception, we have to look at the geopolitical landscape of the surrounding areas. To do this, we will look at three key areas: Judea, obviously, Rome, and Egypt. Judea had been the stomping ground for empires for 500 years before Christianity even emerged. Any king or tyrant that was anybody conquered Israel. The Jews have been heavily influenced by these conquering nations, notably by the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. The Persians brought with them Zoroastrianism and the concept of an evil external of the body. The Greeks brought with them Gnostic mysticism and esoteric occultism, mixing and blending philosophies and deities together. The Romans brought with them hierarchical structures, and this would prove very important later on. Judea became a cultural whirlpool, a vast sea of warring ideas. Among the Jewish people were numerous ideologies and sects, but the three most prominent of these were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. The Essenes are mentioned by several ancient writers. They are thoroughly discussed by Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder. They were founded, as far as we can tell, about 200 BC, and they lasted, as far as we can tell, till around 100 AD. They were a strong communal sect, living together in communities being led by a single teacher. There may have been a single overall teacher, as far as we can tell, as several of the Dead Sea Scroll writings, which were found in an Essene community, refer to a teacher of righteousness. They were an esoteric cult, divining truth from sacred texts and scriptures, committed to doing acts of charity among the poor, and often taking vows of celibacy. If this is sounding familiar to you, you aren't wrong. Christianity was influenced heavily by them, at the very least, and there is some discussion that the Gospels themselves were written by members of the Essenes as an exoteric text, taking the writings of Paul and other early Jesus-worshipping cults and combining them into exoteric parables. There is some evidence of this in the Gospels themselves, besides the Essenes not being mentioned at all, as they would as an esoteric cult, and also in the book of Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus is speaking to the crowds and his disciples, and to the crowds he gives parables, but to his disciples he gives the true meaning. The reader may take this at face value as what Jesus, as a real person, meant, but the writer, as an esoteric Essene, may have been saying to his fellow initiates that the whole book was meant to be taken as a parable, and only they knew the true meaning behind it. It is further possible that the reason the Essenes, which appear to be a robust, thriving community, suddenly disappeared from history is that they became something else. They became Christians. Not that they converted. No, that they simply forgot the esoteric meanings behind their writings. The hidden truths, so cleverly disguised in the Gospels, eventually became exoteric orthodoxy, as the deeper initiates had fewer and fewer members. Interesting enough, the ideas and practices of the Essenes would be well preserved in the Catholic Church under the guise of monastic orders. Some, like the Franciscan monks for example, take orders of poverty and chastity, and they focus on doing acts of charity for the poor, just like the Essenes. Now in Rome, as Christianity developed, it began to take on the political structure of the Roman culture. Hierarchies developed. In the early empire, churches varied considerably in their theologies. Each church would have its core beliefs, but then they would also have their additional gospels and scriptures that they adhered to. One of the more popular sects were the Arians, a Christian cult that taught Jesus was created by God, but subservient to him. This belief was similar to monarchianism, in which God was a single person and presented himself as a side or mode in which to manifest himself. Modalism. Now, while Greek and Jewish sects were likely to squabble amongst each other or even retreat from the public, Roman sects were quite the opposite. Due to their very political structure, the churches vied for power and influence, condemning each other and engaging in vitriolic written diatribes against their rivals. They even went as far as to petition the pagan emperor Aurelian to depose Paul of Samosata, the patriarch of Antioch. The Council of Nicaea decided that female deaconesses ordained in the Paulinist sect would not be allowed to keep their holy orders and must go back to being lay people. But we'll speak a little bit more of Nicaea in the next video. Not all sects in early Christianity were considered heretical. Some were merely focused on a different aspect of their spirituality. While the church was becoming more political and structured, there was a growing urge among a number of people to leave the hierarchical nature of the church and seek out lives of solitude in the deserts of Palestine and Egypt. While definitely not being the first person to live a life as a hermit, Anthony of Egypt is credited as being the father of monasticism in the Catholic Church. He began as an ascetic, a lone hermit. But people began to be drawn by his lifestyle and his teachings, and by the time of his death in 356, Egyptian monasticism, helped by Pachomius, was a popular way of worship, with an estimated 10 to 15,000 monastic practitioners in or about Egypt. This extreme form of Christianity appealed to many, as the persecutions against the Christians had ceased, and those that were desiring a martyr's death could instead spend years of solitude, mortifying their flesh, in return for greater glory. In heaven, of course, not on earth. This sect of Christianity would eventually stabilize, with bishops and abbots leading the monastic communities, but not before other ascetics sprang up, some with unusual practices. One of the more interesting ones is Simon the Stylite, who climbed atop of a pillar in Syria in the early 5th century and remained there for 35 years. Another, Alypius, is said to have stood on his feet for 50 years, and then, when his feet could no longer hold him upright, he lay down on his side for the next 14 years until his death, all for the greater glory of God. The practice eventually died out in the 15th century. Invading Ottomans might have that effect on it, but there actually is a man today in the country of Georgia that lives atop a 131-foot pillar as an ascetic. Link in the description. So early Christianity, for all its claims to be, was not this stable, boring, and well-established theology. It was vibrant and exciting, with new ideas being presented and old myths being merged with new mythology. It was wildly diverse, maybe even more so than it is today. But the one thing that it was not, ever, was unchanging. Thank you everyone for supporting me as I do this series on the Catholic Church. Please, feel free to leave a comment down below and tell me exactly what you think of this series, this particular video, what you are looking forward to in the future, and any other ideas you would like me to talk about that relate to this series. But before I go, I would like to do a shout out to a very, very amazing YouTuber that I enjoy watching his videos all the time. It is Godless Engineer, who has been telling me that I need to hurry up and get this series done and is constantly nagging me for my next video. Thank you, Godless Engineer. I always appreciate your support and your kind words. And for those of you who don't know Godless Engineer, you're bad people. You should go over to his channel right now. There will be a link in the description down below. And check him out. He is on Reason Talk. He had part of IRT, Initial Reaction Trailers, or Theater. I'm not really sure about that one. And of course, his own channel, my bad, Godless Engineer. He's doing this amazing series on the Jesus myth theory. Check that out. Give him some love. Like every one of his videos. Share them everywhere. Tell him I said hi. Thank you for watching. Fuck yeah, I got that one. Whatever, close enough. This was a similar belief to Hi D, how are you doing?